But look, I just want to thank you for coming along. I particularly want to thank Alex for hosting us and for submitting to the red tape tip line, and especially Minister Pink, who I believe is making enormous leaps and bounds right across the building portfolio, whether it's crazy earthquake regulations that have held New Zealand back, getting more affordable building material, or right across the building sector. I think Chris Pink is doing a tremendous job to make life easier for Kiwis. And when we heard from Alex in our red tape tip line, a tiny irritant, not the biggest problem that New Zealand is faced by any stretch of the imagination, but something that's just so stupid that the councils don't want to enforce it, people don't want to follow it, no one benefits, and yet it's a rule that you'd be surprised how many people are irritated by. We said to Chris, do you think we could do something about this? And being the kind of guy Chris is, cutting red tape right across the government, he said absolutely. So we wanted to bring you here, and we're very grateful for being hosted, to show that we do actually have a government that is committed to removing silly rules, no matter how big or no matter how small. Sometimes it's replacing the entire RMA, which is clearly needed if it takes 4 years to subdivide. Sometimes it's a silly rule that says you have to have your garden shed at least as far away from the wall as it is high. The rules that we're changing mean if it's less than 10 square metres, it can be right up against the fence, and if it is more than 10 square metres and up to 30, it needs to be 1 metre away. And this is the practical reality for a lot of people for a long time before rules like this came in. Now you hear from people who are developers who say, well, are we going to get busted for this? Maybe, maybe not. Do we want to spend time thinking about it? Definitely not. And it's just one of those little examples of how New Zealanders end up spending more time trying to comply with rules, get permission to do stuff, than actually do stuff. And that's why we're here today, to show that the red tape tip line, 800 people so far, triaging them, processing them, making changes. For example, the government recently changed the threshold for probate on a will. That's a massive relief for thousands of Kiwis who have the misfortune to lose someone, and we keep on making these little changes time after time. I don't know if Chris, you had anything to say?
Yeah, look, I don't have much to say because you've actually covered it really well, David. Certainly from a building and construction perspective, we know that there are large and small reforms that we need to make, and David's mentioned a couple of those. But of course, in a small setting, for example, an individual household or dwelling, a small change can actually make a big difference. So that's the spirit in which we're approaching our work. Large and small changes needed, and certainly it's really great to interact with the work that the Ministry for Regulation and David's red tape tip line has been engaged in, because these are the things that are important to Kiwis. We're responding to those, and so it's with great pleasure that we're here and can make a small dent in the problem of regulation and cut some red tape. So we're looking forward to doing that, and again with gratitude for the initiative to get in touch for yourselves, but also for fellow Kiwis in Auckland and across the country who are facing such issues. It's a small but important step in the right direction.
The building behind you is currently illegal.
And that's the kind of irritation that drives people to run to the red tape tip line and say, look, we've got to change this. People shouldn't feel that they're needlessly breaking the law. That's why we think it's important that the law reflects what people actually do.
You talk about this being a tiny irritant. I mean, is this something that affects a lot of Kiwis?
You'd actually be surprised when we went to say, well, look, how many people are there that are really affected by this? Can we find someone who actually has a shed like this, where they either have put it in an odd place or just worried that they're breaking the law? And suddenly we're actually inundated with people who said that they felt that this was a problem. So again, one of the advantages of the red tape tip line is things that you mightn't think actually bothered people, they do, and that's why people write in.
What's some of the rationale for those rules existing in the first place? Was it for fire to stop jumping from one property to the other? Was there any good rationale for it?
Well, one of the things that we do when we get a tip is we ask that very question, maybe there's a good reason for the rule? And sometimes we write back to the people and say, we understand you're irritated, but there's a reason for this rule. In this case, no one can find a reason, so we get rid of it.
And can I just add, I mean, part of the work, especially in building and construction, is recognising that where a rule does exist for a good reason, and if it's not been lost in the mist of time or no longer applicable because technology has improved, then nevertheless we want a proportionate approach. So it's about sort of being sensible. If it were about fire safety risk and a structure's less than 10 metres and small enough only to host about a box of matches, then you think realistically the opportunity isn't going to be there for the whole suburb to be set alight by the reason of the proximity of a small structure to that. So we think between that and as rightly David's mentioned around the councils, they don't want to be having to spend their time and money and their resources chasing relatively small problems when there is serious work that we can expect that it is reasonable for them to do. So it's actually a win for them as well.
You mentioned it being for sleepouts as well. Are there any restrictions around what these spaces can be used for?
That's a very much a building question. He's in charge of the rules now.
Thank you. I mean, there are general rules in the resource management space, but also the building space about the use of the property. So these rules relate to the square metre coverage, so up to 10 metres, up to and including the boundary, and then 10 to 30 as David set out. In terms of granny flats, so the minor residential units, they can be up to 70 square metres. The legislation will pass in a matter of weeks, won't need either a resource consent or a building consent, and for those they'll be up to at least 2 metres from the boundary, recognising the slightly different usage of those and the different height in many cases, as you say.
Did you have about a number or an estimated number of how many people actually called in for this specific issue to your red tape tip?
I have to ask our chief executive. Apparently 3 people, according to information I've just received. So we've had a number of people tip in, and as a result we've been able to act relatively soon. There is an incredible diversity of issues that come up, and this is one that we thought, well, so crazy, why wouldn't you do something about it?
And I suppose off the back of that, is there a minimum number of complaints you'd want for an issue to then go ahead and cut?
Granny is now shaking her head. Don't worry, I can answer most of the questions, it's okay. No, look, there's not. One person with a really good tip can lead to real change. 100 people irritated by a rule that exists for a good reason, we'll have to keep the rule.
Can I just add, it's an interesting exercise in having a red tape tip line to the extent we're asking people to self-incriminate. So I suspect for every one person who says, yes, I've got something illegal on my property, there might be a few more besides who are quite reasonably lying in wait until such time as we change the rules.
That is an excellent and somewhat helpful observation, thank you.
The building behind you is only 7 square metres, so they could actually put that right up against the boundary, couldn't they?
Yeah, they could.
Make it even bigger.
Well, they could add 3 metres and move it closer to the fence, and especially as New Zealanders are asked to live closer together in denser cities, this stuff becomes more relevant. So if you think about a quarter acre, if you've ever actually been to a quarter acre site, it's huge. Whereas we're on a site now where the people are actually subdividing because New Zealanders have got a real drive to make housing more affordable, and that's when these kinds of space issues become more relevant.
What's the 1-storey height limit? So how high can 1 storey be?
Well, that's another excellent question that I'll defer to the Minister for Building Regulation.
Yeah, I don't want to put you wrong in the granny flats legislation, which is specifically 1 storey. We're also giving a particular real world height that's measurable, and the reason is because in the case of granny flats where you've got the tiny home practices of having effectively little mezzanine levels, technically you could say, well, that's 2 stories. So we don't want to be unnecessarily restrictive in that, so we're being as clear as possible, which is also part of the exercise of good lawmaking. We think having the clarity so people know whether they're on the right side of the law or not.
So there's not a height limit, it's just...
There is, but I can't remember off the top of my head, and I'll put you wrong, so we can come back to you on that.
Very happy to provide that to the millimetre. But